Well, good morning. I'm Jeff. I'm the senior minister here, and it's good to welcome you all here on Easter. Easter typically is one of our biggest Sundays of the year, and it's good to see so many people here. And it's a tradition in this church, and really in churches, period, really it goes back hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, that on Easter Sunday, somebody in front of the crowd would say, "He's risen," and then the crowd would say, "He's risen indeed." So I want to do that with you. He is risen. He is risen indeed. I was trying to think this week about how to explain myself. I wanted to talk about Jesus and Him redeeming us and how the resurrection tied into all that. That was kind of the theme of the message. And when I was thinking about Christ the Redeemer, my head drifted to the statue, in Rio de Janeiro, and it's a 98-foot tall statue. It's almost as wide, 92 feet there, side to side. I talked to somebody this morning, who had been there. They caught me after the first service, and they said, "Yeah, I was there. I got to see it," and that was pretty cool. And they said when you get up close to it, it's actually made of like little mosaics. It's like soapstone and stuff like that. And the whole statue is hollow. You can go up inside of it. And I knew, you can't do, like as a tourist, you can't do it, but people can go upside into the middle of it. And you can see like the lightning rods on it there on the shoulder. It gets struck by lightning a lot. I didn't know that. And lightning blew the finger off once of Jesus. They had to put a finger back on because there's so much lightning. And but this guy told me this morning that he was there. And he said a couple of his friends, they were in the service, and they happened to be in Rio, happened to be in Brazil, and they went to see this statue. You take a tram almost straight up the mountain to get to see it, and then on the top of the mountain, there's all these vendors, and they're selling food, and they're selling T-shirts and beer and different things, and you can buy that while you're watching the deal. And they encourage you, he said, to really watch your beer because there's monkeys on the top of the mountain, and they'll steal your beer. Which I think is where the phrase drunk monkey came from, or drunk as a monkey. That's probably where that came from. It's probably from that statue there in Brazil. A bunch of drunk monkeys up there in the trees around the statue. And they tell you to watch out for that sort of thing. Now the nation of Brazil, very proud of this statue. It means a lot to them. It's kind of like their national landmark, which is kind of a cool thing. In our day and age, and when so much of the world it seems like is secular, to have a whole nation that their most iconic symbol is this statue of Christ. In 2010, when they were remodeling the statue, they had scaffolding up around it, and some kids snuck in at night and tagged it, graffiti tagged the statue. And it wasn't like they were making a political statement. They were just putting graffiti on it like you'd see in cities. And the nation kind of came unglued. They were so offended by this, and there were riots and parades, and it got to be so intense that the kids who did it apologized. "Hey, listen, we just goofing around. We didn't mean anything by it. We love Jesus." And then it became a deal where they had to apologize and explain themselves. Because for a lot of people in that city, there's something kind of comforting about the idea that Jesus is up there looking down on us. And even though it's just a statue, it symbolizes something that they believe, that I believe, that Christ is alive and that He is risen and that He is keeping an eye on us. And the Jesus who lived all those years ago is still alive today, and that we can call out to Him today, and that He still responds, and He still cares, and it still matters. It's never quit mattering. I guess when you see the statue, you're reminded a little bit that Jesus is famous. Even all these years later. And He's famous, not strictly speaking, just because of His teaching. And He's not famous, strictly speaking, just because of that moment that He lived. But He's famous because He came back. And that makes Him unique amongst all the people in the world. And it makes Him worth following. And it makes Him worth our attention this morning. I wanted to talk to you today about how He comes to redeem us. And like I said, in churches all around the world, this is kind of the focus, is the resurrection. This Sunday, really no matter what church you go to, this is probably what you're going to have to listen to, is something about the resurrection. I have a friend in town who comes to church usually, not very often, comes usually just on Easter, and I saw him, it's been a year ago or two since we had the conversation, and he had come several years in a row on Easter, and I asked him, "You'll come back this coming week?" And he goes, "I don't know, you preach the same thing every time I come." And see, that's the danger of that. Now, you can do little things to make it different. You can change where you sit or something like that. For all you guys in the front row, I want to welcome you here this morning. I know you don't normally get quite so close, and that's kind of cool to have you up here with us. But you can do that. You can on purpose try to think about different parts of it that mean something to you. You can on purpose try to think about what aspect of it really strikes you. But what I wanted to talk about today is a story where Jesus, it's two guys going to Emmaus, a town just outside Jerusalem, and Jesus speaks to them. And it's one of the appearances of Jesus afterward that gets talked about quite a bit. And it answers a lot of the objections that people have. Well, I'm not sure I can believe in the resurrection. Maybe it was just a hallucination, or maybe, they just wanted to believe it so bad, that's why they saw it, or maybe they just liked his teaching and it evolved from there. And I think this story addresses all those things. So I wanted to talk about that just a little bit this morning. And well, here's the story. It's in Luke chapter 24. It says, that same day, two of them, and these are not two of the 12 apostles. These are just two. We know that 12 apostles followed Jesus around everywhere. They were with him all the time. But there were hundreds of guys who just kind of hung out. And they were around. And Jesus, wherever he was at, there was always a crowd there. And he would speak to the crowd. And this is two of those guys. And they were in the crowd, and they were with Jesus a lot. And the same day, Mark got up and read earlier about the resurrection, read how the women saw the vision of angels there. That same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, and it was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about everything that happened. And as they walked, and they're talking and they're discussing these things with each other, Jesus comes up. And he walks alongside them there, but they're kept from recognizing him. And there's two different views about this. Some guys think it's just a natural thing, that Jesus is on purpose, maybe keeping his hood pulled down, or he's not really looking at them, or maybe the last time these two guys saw Jesus, he was all bloody on the cross, and now he looks normal, and they just don't recognize him. Or it could be a supernatural thing. It might be that he's on purpose keeping them from seeing who he is, because there's another story about Mary Magdalene seeing Jesus on Easter morning, and she doesn't recognize him right off either. That maybe there's a supernatural thing going on where he kind of keeps people from knowing who he is. But either way, whatever, he walks up on them, and they're talking, and he pops in, and he asks them, "Well, what are you talking about?" And they stop. They stop walking. When he says it, kind of shakes them, and their faces are downcast. And one of them, a guy named Cleopas, says, "Are you the only guy, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know about the things that have happened there in these days?" Which is kind of an ironic thing to say to Jesus, because he's very aware of all the things that have been going on the last couple of days. But they don't know that it's Jesus, right? It's like you as the reader know it's Jesus, but they don't know it's Jesus. And so he kind of, he answers them. Well, what things? He kind of plays along with them. And so they say, well, about Jesus of Nazareth. They said he was a prophet, and he was powerful in word and deed. So he really was good at good talking. He really explained things, but he did things too, miracles, and healed people. He was powerful in word and deed before God and before all. It was witnessed. A lot of people saw it. And they said the chief priests and the rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped he was going to be the one to redeem Israel. And I like that sentence there, and so much of my sermon is based on that last part of the sentence there. We had hoped that he'd be the one to redeem Israel. And I just kind of want to focus on all that, because I think that's interesting. In other words, we don't hope it anymore. We had hoped it. We had hoped he'd be that guy, but now he's crucified. And we thought he was all big and strong, powerful in word and deed, and then we saw him weak. And he's just letting those guys bully him around. We saw him heal the blind, and yet he let people just push him around, and he let them nail him to the cross, and we saw all of it. And it just went on for hours. And we had hoped maybe that he would be different. But he's just a guy. He's just a man. And they said, what's more, And then they're talking about the stuff that Mark read to you earlier when he was up here. He said, what's more, it's the third day since all this took place. And in addition, some of the women of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb this morning, but they couldn't find his body. Now, they still don't think he resurrected. He's not there. Somebody came and stole it, I guess, or somebody came and took it. And they came and told us they had a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions went to the tomb and they looked, but they didn't see Jesus. And Jesus says, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. And then the literal of that second part there is how slow of heart you are, he says. You're slow of heart. And it's a kind of an anachronism, that phrase. It's not a phrase we would use today. But the Jewish, much like how we think, that would tell you your heart was the seat of your emotion, right? Your facts and stuff, that's stored up here. But they believed your heart, when they talk about your heart, it's your passions, your dreams, your hopes. And it's what you believe. And Jesus says, you're slow of heart, you know. This should be obvious, what's going on. And you're just missing all of it. And then he starts explaining. He says, didn't the Messiah have to suffer? And he starts explaining it, you know. He starts letting them see. And you probably never thought about this, but like if you could go to any Bible study ever since the beginning of the world, this would be the Bible study to go to, what Jesus does with these guys over the next few miles. As they're walking, he just starts explaining it from the Bible. I mean, this was always the plan. And I don't know how he explained it. Maybe he explained it like Stephen did. You know, when Stephen was explaining it later in Acts, he says, you know, a lot of times the guy that God chooses to be his man or his woman, the people don't like him. You know, a lot of times the one that God chooses to be his representative, the people reject that person. And he could point at Moses or David or Elijah or Jeremiah or Isaiah. He could point at Samuel. A lot of times the guys that are God's people, the other people don't want to hear what they have to say. That happens over and over and over again in Scripture. And just because you're the one doesn't mean that God's going to protect you from that. Maybe he explained all that. Maybe he explained with Moses and talked about the sacrifices and explained to him, you know how you guys have to bring sacrifices all the time. You bring in a lamb or a goat or a cow and you shed the blood of that animal and you offer it and the blood of that animal covers your sin. But your sin, as soon as it gets covered, you're putting new sin on. And you're doing it all over again. And so you got to bring in another animal. And there was always the idea that the blood of the sacrifice would one day, remember Passover? The blood would save you. And maybe he took him to Isaiah, where God says one day God's going to send a perfect sacrifice. And it won't be a lamb. Though, like a lamb is silent before his shearers, this man that God will send will also not defend himself. He'll take it. He'll take it for you. And by his wounds, by his stripes, by his scars, we're all going to be healed. And maybe he explained all that. But whatever, for a couple miles, Jesus is walking with them, and he's just explaining it all to them. And maybe they're asking questions. Well, you know, does God really, what's going on? And it proves that God loves you. Maybe he talked about a guy named Hosea in the Old Testament. Hosea had a wife who left him. And she goes and she's running around with lots of different men. And God says to Hosea, go get her and tell her you love her and ask her to come back. And it's real embarrassing, you know, for Hosea to go do something like that. But Hosea does it. And she's gotten in such trouble, his wife, that she's actually being sold in a slave market. Somebody's eventually it's awful. And he goes and he redeems her. He pays for her. And he takes her home and he makes her his wife again. He doesn't, like everything that happened, we'll just pretend like that didn't happen. And you're my wife. And God does that, Jesus says. That's how God is. And we walk away from God and we run and do our own things. And he comes and grabs us and he brings us back. And maybe he explained all that. Like I said, I don't know. But for hours, for miles, he's explaining this all to these guys. And he's telling them. And when they get to the village, Jesus acts like he's just going to keep going. But they urge him to stop and hang out with them. You know, the day's almost over. Come eat with us. And so he goes in. And while he's at the table with them, he took bread and he broke it and he gave thanks and he gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened. And if you believe supernatural, right, then maybe in that moment he allows them to really see him. He does that with Mary Magdalene too. He calls her by name and then she can really see him, and maybe it's a supernatural thing. The veil is gone and they can look at him. Or if you believe it's more of a natural thing, a lot of guys think when he hands them the bread, or maybe when he blesses it and holds it up and prays about it, his sleeve drops and they can see these scars on him, and that's what wakes them up. And I don't know which of those things it is. I maybe both. But they recognize him, and they realize who they've been talking to, and then he's gone, and they say to each other, were not our hearts burning? Now, earlier I told you about slow of heart, but now didn't we have burning hearts? I mean, weren't our hearts racing while he was talking to us about all that stuff and opened the scripture to us? I mean, didn't you feel it too? And they're asking each other. And so they immediately get up and they go back to the city, and they find the disciples, and it's true. They said, it's true, he's back. We saw him. And they told about what happened on the way and how he was recognized when he broke the bread, and it affected him. And I want to think about that line again. I'll give my whole sermons about that one line. We had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. So I want to talk about that. People who are slow of heart, right? They're not open to any information beyond what they can totally understand. Right? Very much realists, kind of cynical about things they don't totally understand. And at first you think, well, that sounds like a logical way to go, until you start to realize that there's so much in the world right now that I don't understand. I don't know how my phone works. I just know that it does. Nate Bergazzi has a whole funny routine about that if he went back in time, he wouldn't be able to help people very much. Like he says, as I can imagine, I went back in time and I would tell them, in the future, we'll have phones. We can see people and talk to them and just have a conversation. And they'll say, great, make us one. And I can't make you one. I don't know how to make you one. And there's so much of what we have. I couldn't make you one. In the future, we'll have cars that can just do all this. Well, great, make me one. I couldn't make you one. I wouldn't be able to make you one. I don't know how to make you one. And there's so much of the stuff that we have that just makes our lives so easy, but I don't know how it works. I just know that it works. And I know who to take it to if it quits working. I think about relationships like that. And if you're slow of heart, it's hard to believe that somebody could really love you. Could really devote themselves to you, could really be there for you. It's very easy to be suspicious of them. Very easy to give up on those relationships. And some people have a hard time with that, right? I mean, they're constantly going from one relationship to another because they just can't imagine that there's not something wrong with this person, or they wouldn't be here. It's hard for a kid to trust mom and dad that they have their best interests at heart. It's hard for a parent to trust a kid that they really do love and respect them. It's hard to trust anybody that you give your heart to, especially if you're slow of heart. And it's very hard to trust God, because God is a different kind of relationship than any other relationship we have. And there's moments when he seems very distant. But a person whose heart is burning, well, that's when heaven kind of touches earth for a moment. For just a minute there, the veil is pulled away and you start to imagine the possibilities. Andy Stanley has a line that he uses in a lot of different sermons, but it's the idea that if you had been following Jesus then, you wouldn't have done your biggest regret. Your biggest regret, whatever that is, the one time, boy, I wish, give anything if I go back and fix that, or I wish I hadn't jumped into that hole, or I wish I could, whatever that is, if you had been following Jesus hard then, you probably wouldn't have went into that hole. You probably wouldn't have went into that deal. And there's moments when the veil is so thin and we can feel that God really is watching over us. And what if it's true? What if it's true that the resurrection happened and that Jesus not only lived for us and died for us, but he's living for us now? What if that's really true, that God still has a plan for my life? What if it's true that I could choose to follow after him and my life might go a whole different direction, and the love and the joy and the peace and the patience, the faithfulness is promised to those people who follow after him? What if I could have some little bit of that? And your heart starts to burn with the possibilities. We had hoped, they said, that Jesus would be the one to redeem Israel. When they say redeem there, they're probably thinking free us from the Romans. They might have been thinking about that story about Hosea that I told you. That was a pretty well-known story amongst, maybe he comes to redeem us like Hosea redeemed his wife, and he paid for her to be freed from her oppression. And maybe Jesus, we had hoped he would come and do that for us. And it is all that, but it's I can't get into this because it's kind of thick and it's deep, and it would take me a lot longer to really explain all of it than I have. But the gist of it, scripturally speaking, is that Jesus said that everybody who sins is a slave to sin. And you don't have to be a believer in the Bible to know that that's true, right? You see it. You see it in your own life. You see it in the lives of others. There's some appetite that I have, and I'll say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore, and then I go do it again. You know? I might even tell everybody that night, hey, I can't drink too much tonight because I've got this stuff going on, and I've got to really watch myself. And then next thing I know, I'm doing more than I should. Or I tell myself, okay, I'm going to this dinner, but I'm not going to eat very much because I'm trying to watch and then I eat all that stuff. Or I say I'm in an argument, and I know the argument's getting personal, it's getting nasty. I should just walk away. I shouldn't say anything else, and then I'm saying it. I'm doing that thing that I know I shouldn't do. I'm taking one more bite or one more drink or one more moment that I shouldn't be spending in this thing. And then there I am. And I know better. You know, it's like there's something inside of me. I can't help it. And Jesus says that whoever sins is a slave to sin. It just has a way of holding you there. And we think about the addict, but it's not just like an Alcoholics Anonymous thing. It's not like that. I mean, it is that, but it's not just, it's everything. My pride and my lust and my greed and my anger, and I can try so hard to get control of it, and then one little fuse will hit and I'm right back in the same hole. And I can see it coming. You know? As soon as I see that person, I'm right back in as soon as I get in the room with them, or as soon as and then I do it again. And Jesus comes to redeem us from that slavery. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they'll talk about you need to access a higher power. And they're pulling from Christianity when they talk that way. And they keep it anonymous so that you don't have to make a decision about Jesus to reap some benefit from Alcoholics Anonymous. But that notion, right, that we need something bigger than us and outside of us that we can hold on to and anchor to break this slavery that we have. Jesus came to redeem us. And there's just no problem in human life that apprenticeship to Jesus doesn't address. And I find that when I hold myself tight to Him and when I draw back close to Him, when I give myself over to Him, He helps me get through those things. And He helps me become the person that I was always supposed to be. I believe, and we talk about on Easter here, that Jesus came to redeem you. And I know when you come into a place like this, I mean, we're all in different spots, right? I mean, maybe to the outside, people sitting around you, everything is going great, but you know where you're at. And for some people, I remember when it happened to me, and I was at a church camp, and I was just a kid myself, and I felt like I was always in the back of the line. I felt like I was always small and insignificant and unimportant. I always felt like I was fighting for position, and this word was spoken, and it talked about a God who loved me, and I didn't have to prove anything to Him. That He loved me before I even knew that He was there. And that He had laid His life down and sacrificed me. I remember when I first heard all that stuff. And the veil between heaven and earth was so thin and my heart was burning. And that's what Easter's about. Is this notion that any one of us can come back to Him whenever we want. And He's waiting on us. I'm going to have the band come back up. We've been teaching you this new song for the last couple of months. It's called The Love of God. And it's talking about how His love is amazing. The first verse, it's so good I almost can't believe it. It's far beyond what hearts could ever dream. The God who set the galaxies in motion would descend to give his life for me. You know, we talk about, we teach people in church, we teach our kids that you need to love your neighbor as yourself. You need to love love them like you love yourself. It's kind of one of the core principles of Christianity. And yet Jesus loves us more than he loves himself. He would descend and give his life for me. What could make perfection bleed for sinners and lead a king to pay so great a cost? All my life, my heart will sing the answer. It's only the love of God. We believe that Jesus loved you so much that he gave everything for you. And we believe on Easter, because he resurrected, it validates and proves the whole message. And it lets us know that he's still on the job, watching out for us. Won't you stand up with me? If anybody needs to make